I am Marwan Cameron, and this is The Conduit. All right, everyone, it is 12 o'clock on Wednesday. One of my favorite places brought to you by Ecosystems. The founder, Mark Boatwright-Frost. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm awesome. I'm so awesome. I'm vibing the Beatles with this topic.
Nice.
I'm hearing a little come together in my ears.
I like it. Well, we have a good hour set up for you today. So we're so glad that you join us. We've got a guest coming in today, Nick Loney. He'll be joining us here shortly. Well,
Always good.
Just to kill a little bit of time, let some folks come on into the show, and then we'll go ahead and get started in earnest. But before we do, let me know, Mark, what's the last week been like for you? What you been up to?
Oh, paperwork. Getting the quarterly tax report done for the state for the nonprofit. Of course, it's that time of year to do our own personal income taxes and such. It's so much fun.
Yes, it is.
It is tax season.
It is tax season. Well, it's good that you're on top of it for sure. How are the gas prices treating you?
Luckily, I have not had to go out and buy a lot of gas since I work local to where I am. It doesn't need to drive, but Terry has been in a little bit of sticker shock. I think she was paying $4.39 last time she filled up her SUV.
Wow.
And so that was pretty heavy. I just saw that they're going to hit 5 soon, but projections are projections. Who knows what the reality is? But there's always the question with that. Okay, we only rely on 3% of Russian oil.
Right.
So is this another speculation boom because oil and gas is a commodity that people like the Koch brothers get to play with to make more money?
Okay.
That was how the Koch brothers made their fortune, was speculating on commodities.
Oh, really?
Specifically oil and gas.
Well, I know it made me wonder how, if 3% is such a small amount, that it would trigger such an issue with us. And then there's like talk of maybe working with Venezuela again. Like what's going on right now?
Well, Saudi Arabia, we asked Saudi to increase their production. They said no. So interesting things going on in the world. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You kind of want to pull back the curtain and see what's really there. The Saudis said no, and then last week and this is going to seem unrelated, but it may or may not be, they executed 48 terrorists in Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
and
really?
I saw the headline, and the series of questions that go through my mind after seeing the headline is, okay, are these people who have pissed off the Saudi royal family and the Saudi government, such as it is, the royal family? Are these people who are actually terrorists, and the Saudis are starting to finally crack down on the people that a lot of the royal family have been funding for the last decade or two, or 3 or 4? I mean, you see that, and then the Saudis turn around and say, no, they're not going to up production. If you've read the book, The End of Oil, which was put out well over a decade ago now, the Saudi oil fields had already used 57% of the estimated amount of what's in them.
Really?
And we've only upped production for the last decade. So the question is, what's really behind the curtain?
Mm-hmm.
Are they executing terrorists? Are they are they cleaning the field and planning to do something else while we're distracted with the Ukraine and Russia? What's really going on? And I'm not saying that I have any idea what the answer is, but I sure would like to look behind the curtain.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And with the things that we talk about here on this show, and the mission of bringing folks together. I mean, this is another stark reminder of how important that really is for us to get ourselves together.
Yeah, and I'm going to start this off with a real fun topic. About 3 years ago or so, I was at a meeting in Seattle with a whole bunch of people that were pushing an agenda to raise the gas taxes to end climate change. Um, and the nicest thing I can say about it is it was a completely delusional idea that didn't take into account a lot of the people who can't afford Teslas or even Priuses or Hondas.
Hmm.
Um, and the room was full of middle-aged to older white people screaming about how we need to have more electric cars. And I'm stood up and reminded them that there's a poor tax, and it costs poor people more for everything than it costs you.
Mm.
And of course, the scream of how can that possibly be? And I said, okay, so you drive a 10-year-old car. You can't afford a Tesla. You can't afford a Prius. You can't afford a Honda Civic electric car or a Nissan Leaf. So you're driving a car that's more expensive to drive, more expensive to repair, and you absolutely depend on it because you're not making enough money to even pay the bills every month. And you're going deeper and deeper in debt every month. So you're paying a 20% interest rate on your credit cards, which is a poor tax because you don't have enough money to pay for things. You're
Right.
paying more money for your car, for gas in your car. You're paying for maintenance, for insurance, and trust me, insurance for lower income people is higher than the insurance for upper income people generally.
Hmm.
And you're skipping things like medical insurance because you can't afford it. It doesn't. The bills don't go that far, and not a lot of people pay for those. So when you look at all of that, there's a poor tax, and there's a whole bunch of people out there that want to that are influencing government decisions that want to push agendas like a 35-cent extra gas tax because that will solve climate change. And I'm a bit of a mathematician, so I look at it and says, okay, I'm looking at 35 cents a gallon. How many people? Da, 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 da. How's that going to change climate change? I can see it going into the general fund and maybe helping Washington State's budget a little bit, but I've never seen anything specific about how that's going to address that. But a whole
So,
bunch of people were on board.
but they didn't say how that was gonna, how they were gonna.
There were not a lot of details. There was a whole lot of words, but not a lot of details about how it was going to affect it. But it was to disincentivize people from driving. And I said, so people are going to stop working and stop going to work because
Wow.
because you made it more expensive for them.
Hmm.
People are suddenly going to have the money and the resources to go out and buy Teslas or Priuses because you've made it more expensive for them to live. Like more likely, people are going to have to skip meals to go to work to pay less bills, to pay fewer bills because they won't have the money to cover all of them, to go
Right.
deeper in debt.
Well, I think that that's a good segue into today's kind of topic. So, will you cue that up for folks? Now, I'll put that in the chat.
Okay, so there was a 24. You also watch Beau the Fifth Column. I don't know if you saw the one yesterday that talked about what is an oligarch and are there oligarchs in the United States? Because
Mm.
now you hear the mainstream media talking about oligarchs in Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
So an oligarch, by in a light definition, an oligarch is somebody who's wealthy enough to influence legislation to their benefit.
Okay.
And Princeton University in 2014 came out with a paper which I actually downloaded yesterday, and I have not read yet, that basically point out that the U.S. has oligarchs, and that in the early 2000s you can track where the will of the people, us, has been overridden by the will of the corporation and the wealthy.
Mm.
and it is I mean, it's trackable, it is continuous, and it is growing. So when you think about that, you think about, okay, what the need of the people isn't as important as the need of the wealthy or the corporation. And then, of course, Citizens United, which just took all of the blockades away from that, meaning corporations, people. So we see this, we scream about it, but how do you fix it?
Well,
I
that's the
mean,
million-dollar question.
yeah, and so I'm saying you fix it by coming together.
Okay.
But you can't just fix that. You have to fix the underlying mindset that allows it to happen. And having read Ishmael, you realize that that mindset has been going on and growing for about 15,000 years. We have changed. We changed our environmental and our evolutionary path to become a culture of takers, of people moving to the top. There have been stopgaps and rollbacks in that over time because people do things like, oh, write the Constitution of the United States, and we're 240 some odd years, and it's a testament to the strength of the Constitution. It took 240 years to corrupt it to the level where takers are now running the country again. So we need to go back to the Constitution and look at the we the people part and get the clue that we the people have to come together. We don't have to agree with each other. We don't have to, think that we all don't have to be the same. We don't have to give up our individualism, but we have to come together and agree on certain fundamental values that are human values. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, because no one's going to do it for us. And as a Princeton University paper points out, the power is in the few, the 1%, the 3%, the 4%, not in the 90% who have needs.
So let me ask you, as we get ready to explore that topic, I can see those that are listening and saying, this sounds like socialism to me, and that is a bad word to a good portion of Americans. So what is your response to that?
So let's talk about that issue for a moment, and why socialism is a bad word. First of all, I'll challenge that most people never even read the definition of socialism. I'll challenge. The second thing is, why is it that the United States, the wealthiest country in the planet, with the most power, the most powerful military, is the only industrial nation on the planet that is not socialist?
Mm.
Why is that? And on a whole nother program, we can talk about how slavery plays into that and how slavery is still a factor today. It's just not called slavery anymore. It's called prison.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with American exceptionalism, right? You're saying that America is the only country that doesn't embrace socialism. So, well, how do you define that? And then what do you say to folks that are like, we're going toward a socialist society, we don't want that, we reject that, but at the same time, that's what I hear when you say we need to come together, right?
Okay, we need to come together to make decisions that make us more human, to make our environment more human and more supportive of our humanity. And socialism does that. Essentially, that's what it's about. And if you look at it for what it is and not what it's painted to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's about us. We talk about universal health care. That's socialist. We talk about welfare. That's socialist. We talk about Social Security. That's social. We already are a socialist country in a lot of ways. We just haven't embraced the importance of humanity and supporting the humanity.
I see. Let's welcome Nick to the
Hey, Nick,
show.
good to see you.
Hello.
How you doing, Nick?
Welcome
I'm
back.
doing very well. And you, gentlemen?
Awesome.
Yeah, we're doing fantastic. You came in rated a hot button topic of
Yeah, it's
socialism.
actually, it's one of the issues I'm very well educated on. I come from a conservative standpoint, but I've done a lot of reading on the literature. I wouldn't quite call myself a subject matter expert, but I'm getting close. I look at it from, a psychological perspective, a little bit of a sociological perspective as well. Yeah, it is attractive to people. Not to jump in here.
Oh no, please.
But this is that postmodernism ideology. Essentially the claim that since there are a innumerable number of ways in which the world can be interpreted and perceived, there's many of them, and those are tightly associated then to a non-canonical manner of interpretation, which can be reliably derived. And so that's the fundamental claim of that in itself. And Mark, does have a point with it's highly attractive, and that's just to say the least. It's sort of shocking. And I'll stop right there and let you guys kind of fill in with that. I don't know how well versed Mark is on postmodernism, but
Moderately, but not greatly. I'm mostly a feet on the street kind of look at this. In the United States, we have an assumption, and I will say an assumption in the term of making an ass out of you and me. We assume from the government down that corporations are going to be responsible and provide health care, retirement, and all of those pieces. And that's been degrading for the last 50 years that I know of, to the point now where people are making minimum wage barely, and it's not a living wage. And people have to live 3 or 4 to a unit to be able to afford rent. Healthcare is outrageously expensive. The whole idea of healthcare insurance and privatizing everything is that the competitive nature of it will bring the prices down, and that's not the case. It's absolutely not the case. And so, if in lieu of our acceptance that the corporations are going to do this and they're going to have the responsibility for this is patently false, then who's going to take care of that? And we as individuals, again, it gets pushed lower on the scale, and you have to come up with the money to cover all of these things that are just so you can live and do work. Or do you look to the government to step up to put a system in place that will allow you to live so that you can work? Now, the whole idea that people are lazy, I don't know that many lazy people, and I don't know that many stupid people. I do know a lot of poor people.
I'm trying not to smile.
I mean, okay, I have a saying here that we share at the office is that people aren't stupid, they're indoctrinated. And there's a difference.
Okay.
And people, born human beings, we are trained from our education system up to not ask the next question. And we have been roaringly successful at that process. So I don't think people are stupid. I think that they need to be uneducated and re-educated into asking the next question. They need to come together. We need to have discussions, and questions have to be raised that people actually think about the answers and participate in the process of changing that. And I think once that starts happening, you're going to see a whole new process with people. So we've spent the last couple hundred years dumbing people down, making them not ask the next question, voting for a party instead of a policy or a person. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think it's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. I'm going to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, and I don't care about the person because they will have vetted them for me. How well is that working for us?
So you're proposing that parties go away and you just vote on issue?
I think that we should be voting for a person who represents us, regardless of what party they represent. I think we should be voting for policy issues that represent us. But again, then we go back to the oligarchy. Works really well for them, doesn't it?
Well, so I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm like, well, who represents my interests? Because I think that I'm pretty conservative by nature, but I do like a lot of the social programs that exist to help people.
Well,
So
I should hope
for
you
me,
do
it's
with
a la carte.
G2.
Well, it's a la carte, right?
Yeah.
So there's things that I like from the conservative standpoint, and then there's things that I like from a more liberal standpoint. So I don't see a person that is in office at this point that represents even 70% of
How
what
about
would make me.
50%?
No, I I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But when you think about it, and again, I'm not going to name names, and I've said this before in your program, I know several politicians that came out of school and into the public sector and have never actually worked for a living in their lives.
Hmm.
They have gone right into politics. They have been elected to various offices and then more offices and then more offices. And then they end up as congressmen, sometimes senators, and they've never had to struggle for rent. They've never had to struggle to pay health insurance. They've never had to wonder where the next meal is going to come from. How do they represent us?
But is that a slippery slope? Because then you're making it a class issue the other way.
Well, there are 1% of the very, very, very wealthy, maybe 30% of the moderately wealthy, and then the rest of us. So if you're talking about 72 or 68%, shouldn't the person in office that is representing should represent the majority, not the minority? Isn't that what the part of majority rule is about?
Oh, I agree with that. And Nick, what are your thoughts there?
Well, Mark brings up a good point because this one's tough. I don't want to get the viewer sensitive. I don't want to paint the wrong picture. But that's what a lot of things are. That's what life is. It's a struggle. It's a majority representation of things. I do believe with what Mark was talking about, it brings me to a federalist system. I don't want to talk too much about that and get people's heads spinning, but
Yep.
it was a more simpler time then. Do I agree that the majority of a specific class is represented over a lesser class? Absolutely. Do I agree that the current administration is very out of tune with politics, period, and even speaking on them? Absolutely. Um, we've seen it. If you're keeping up with stuff, we've seen it by someone saying, "You've imagined it." Imagined what? Is this a fairy tale? Um, there's not just one thing I can touch on.
Yeah, there's way too many things.
Yeah, it's an incomputable amount of things. We were going to talk. We were talking about the because that's where my train of thought was.
Okay.
We were talking about the cars, the EVs, electric vehicles. I believe they currently comprise less than 2% of the automotive market in the U.S. So, like Mark was saying, it's such a blowback of impact to where you could say, "Hey, go buy one." Okay, there's 40 grand, 50 grand, 60 grand. Well, it's actually doing everyone as a whole a disservice to go and buy an electric vehicle. And so the multitude of automakers that are bringing electrified vehicles to the market in the near future, that growth is growing more rapidly, but over a longer period of time. So increased changing in infrastructure deployment, reduced production, battery costs. You will see electric vehicles begin to prosper. But to sort of tie this into back to politics, what we're talking about, because I changed the subject. I don't want to hurt many people's ears out there in the interwebs.
Oh, we got a smart group here.
Yes, yeah, and I love to have conversation about it. I definitely don't just spew, out the side of my neck. I look at hierarchies, history, literature. Um, I don't, it's back to what Mark was talking about. We vote for a taller person, a white man, um, someone who doesn't always necessarily know what they're talking about. It's an agenda, and those things we need to stop, and we need to start looking into the reasoning behind the bill, the legislature, the social construct. There was a bill that went on in Florida, and what did we see? I don't know if you all are familiar with it. What did we see the media say? And we seen a student protests at school. Don't say gay, but
Oh God, yes.
that had nothing to do with the bill at all. It was about back to indoctrination. It's about indoctrinating children pre-K through third grade, and it's a gray area. Children are of the community, so a teacher, whether they have children or not in their school or not in their school or a different district, can pose the argument. Um, the children are not just mine, so my child, they're ours, because collectively, my child participates in sports, goes to school, rides a bus, um, after school activities, whatever it may be. So in a sense, I understand that. But what the bill proposes is parents have the ability to say, I don't want my child to learn that, because let's be honest, children are very confused creatures without a developed frontal lobe, especially boys, where we know girls mature way sooner, far sooner, and a boy, or a man, if you will, a preteen adult or teen adult, his frontal cortex, his judgmental part of it, is not developed till they're 25. And so really it's allowing the parents to have the say about learning those things versus, we don't know what the curricula is, and we're going to tell your kids X, Y, and Z. So,
There's
so
so much I have to say on that, having homeschooled a daughter, because of the way that our system um, teaches curriculum, and the fact that the way they teach curriculum is so age inappropriate according to science, which the education system seems to ignore. But I think we need to kind of veer back into the coming together piece of it, because I agree with you. There have been so many horrific things done in the name of education, and when we talk about Florida and Texas, and I apologize to any Florida or Texas listeners out there, but some of the most backward and socially reprehensible legislation comes out of those two states. And Texas, I don't know if you know this, happened a few years ago, but Texas led the way to allowing the school to decide whether to vaccinate or medicate your child without your permission.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it was almost adopted nationally. So that schools could just make a decision that they're going to give you your child ADHD drugs without your permission.
Well, I wouldn't let the other 48 off the hook. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But let's jump into our topic for today, because we did go down quite the rabbit hole. We might
Well,
have to
but
do
it,
a second show on this, because
yeah,
it's a
but
fascinating
it brings us
topic.
back to it. Is I think we can agree wholeheartedly that with the lack of representation, our needs are not being really looked at
Mhm.
and or cared for. And we talked about Cascadia, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole with that in my own head while you were talking, Nick. As I'm thinking about, so the people with EVs in Kitsap County during Cascadia, well, the power goes out for a year, their EV is useless. But then again, the roads are impassable, so their EV is useless, and so is everyone's SUV. So I guess it doesn't really matter in the long run, except that it's not even an expensive battery sitting in your parking lot really after a while. But the only way we can change this, to my mind, is to come together. And again, I've been listening to the Beatles song in my head while we've been talking. Um, the first three words of the Constitution, and I say this almost every podcast, is "We the people." Yet we, the people, seem to be indoctrinated to believe that somebody else is going to do this for us. And you may call it socialist, but I think when the people come together and in a we the people process, and we find that we agree that we would like to have health care, and we would like to have food on the table, and we would like to have some level of security that is not dependent on corporate variance and or quarterly profits, so that we can grow and thrive. And those people can come together and create a body that will create the continuity, in turn create the continuity to drive change. Now, I just posted on Facebook, I just posted a video by a gentleman named Matt Farrell, I think is his name. He has a podcast called Undecided, and I've now posted 2 things by him, but today's was really interesting. He was one of the early adopters of the Tesla Powerwall battery for his house and solar. And while he will freely say that he is the poster child for how not to do it, he now has got his solar up and running. His Powerwall is generating. And he pointed out something that I did not know about, and I'm very heartened by. There is a process coming online in many states and many areas, driven by the battery manufacturers, to create a distributed grid network using power walls, so that let's say you have 1,500 homes in your area that have power walls. They have the software to track the power walls and to use them so that peak energy, at peak energy, they pull out of your power wall and share it throughout the grid. And at low times, it recharges your power wall. So it's a shared piece, which is what I've been talking about with the Power for All project. Is we need to have microgrids, and they're up. We're using the power walls and several other manufacturers. I don't mean to just push Tesla here, but several other manufacturers have programs now where they share the power across multi-platforms and are able to use the grid to pull energy and add energy in, which Germany's been working on since 2011. So I'm sure a lot of that came from them. But so we have a potential to move that, but to get it adopted, we have to come together and decide that's something we want. So let's go back to Cascadia, and I briefly mentioned it. FEMA says that Kitsap County is likely to be without power for up to a year in the Cascadia Rising event. And I've mentioned it before, and I've asked everybody to just take a few seconds and think about what that looks like. Your fridge isn't working. Your lights aren't on. You can't use your cell phone. There's no communications. Nothing works for a year, even 4 to 6 months. That's like Stone Age. Food will go bad. A wastewater treatment plant stops working. Everything stops working. So that's what happens when you have a centralized energy distribution system, where it comes from a long distance to you. The strongest argument for renewable energy and local energy is to create a distributed network. So you're generating power locally. Well, we can either put a coal plant here, which means we'd have to ship the coal in from somewhere else. We don't have any ability to do hydro here. So what are our options? Well, we could put solar on every rooftop. We can put wind turbines out in the channel, and we can start generating power here. There are a lot of battery technologies that are not lithium ion that are perfectly usable for, like saltwater batteries. Are working on iron batteries that are far less expensive and are showing really good promise. So the only way to get it done is to have people come together and decide that that's important to them, because they don't want to be without power for a year, and push the utility to go there.
So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think one of the challenges, sometimes we treat the symptom and not the actual,
Exactly.
issue. Getting people to come together. And I get the Cascadia Rising event, right? And I guess I'd say that resonated with me when I met you. um, but we have a problem now, and people are facing so many issues, they can't see that far, right? That's a what if scenario that's not likely to happen, in their lifetime or even their kids' lifetime. It could happen tomorrow, but for them, I've got too many other fish to fry, so I can't even think about that.
My chair's shaking. Hold on. Oh, and it's nothing.
So, but there are people suffering and hurting right now, uh,
Absolutely.
coming through this 2 years of COVID, and then going right into this Ukraine Russia conflict, and food issues, and fuel prices, the pandemic of homelessness before any of this stuff, and it just continuingly getting worse. These What is the catalyst to bring us together now? I think that needs to be maybe the selling point to try to hook people to bring them in.
Exactly so. And you're right. And I take it in the chops every time I say this, but I look at our culture as a cancer, toxic cancer that is working against us. And that all of these things are symptoms of that cancer. So to address the cancer, we have to actually address the illness, not the symptoms. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So the symptoms is how we approach everything, our way of thinking about things. And the only way to change that is by people having conversations, which is coming together. And they
Nick,
have to
jump in
understand it's going to take a long time to fix it. It's not going to happen overnight. And the conversations have to keep happening, and we have to determine a list of priorities that have to be addressed, and we have to do those we have to keep bringing people together, keep growing the network, and keep the priorities in front of us. That's when we come back to the jigsaw puzzle. We have a framework for the puzzle for this discussion, but we need people to bring their pieces of the puzzle so that we can have the discussion and set the priorities and determine what happens first. One of the priorities for me is power for all, distributed power. But equally on that is food for all, being able to produce food locally that can feed people and address the deficit in nutrition.
and
But
and I think that's important, but at the same time, power for
but you
all.
bring a piece of the puzzle that,
uh,
that brings other pieces.
right, but electric grids and all that, that sounds great, but I can't pay my rent. I can't fill my tank up. So,
Exactly. So we need those pieces of the puzzle there too, so we can start looking at ways to address that.
so Nick, jump in and answer this question for me. I'm gonna give it to you the way that I gave it to Mark. Cascadia Rising, right? Electric wall panels. People can't see that far into the future when they're dealing with the crisis of today. So what is the hook to get the buy-in to bring people to the table, and start to have these conversations and congeal together and gather these synergies so that we can address their immediate issues and then address the larger issues going forward?
No, this is a very loaded question. So, and you guys have been talking about it. So, one thing I'd like to touch on is a common pain. It's a shared problem that motivates different people slash groups to. And my partner, I've been writing some things down here as we've been talking. Um, and so it's a common shared problem that motivates different people and groups to work together in ways that could otherwise seem counterintuitive. So you value these alliances, existing at the intersection of self-interest and common interest. Um, we often become sort of collaborators, discovering that we can solve a problem on our own, such as Mark's been saying. Few people are willing to place themselves in a collaborative position, um, uh, or that they don't have any alternative. And so, because of their position and the authority that it brings to them, um, they usually have an alternative, my way or the highway. Um, we all know history has taught us the best leaders collaborate anyways. And so the problem also is that collaborations require time, money, and people. the collaboration process is more complex, slower. It's messier than an independent decision-making process. So a lot of people have to be willing to give up a degree of independence, independence and control. And the given leader, so to speak, must believe the problem possesses a serious threat to the enterprise. What's the enterprise? Well, the common problem, the common pain that we all share. It's great that all these ideas are out there, but you got to pick one, and you got to go for that one, and then you got to move on to the next one. While that other one, while that other one's being maintained, then you can come back to that one. Then you go on to the next one, and then you slowly start to build this hierarchy, and you have because that's what society is. We have hierarchies. A lot of people want to complain it's a patriarchy, but really society's told us it's a hierarchy. We've seen it with chimpanzees.
Princeton will tell you it's an oligarchy.
Well, and that's a different that's a different mechanism.
Yeah.
It is, but everything works off of hierarchy. If we don't have a hierarchy, there's chaos. Everyone knows this. So anyways, back to the question. And I'm going to continue to keep approaching this from sort of like a psychological perspective. Right now I don't care about Cascadia. Right now I'm speaking to G2 Rezeco. And so moving on from the common pain. So we all share that there. And so the next thing that I was talking about writing down here was a convener of stature is a respected and influential presence which can bring people to the table. So this is sort of the same thing that you guys have been talking about. It's all here. You guys have been talking about it. And when necessary, you keep them there. So for example, the inability to turn down an offer is one sign that you're dealing with the convener of stature. The book lays out the roles and responsibilities of the convener. So essentially, you guys have your own book, G2, metaphorically speaking, of lifting people up, assisting them, guiding them to resources. Mark, same thing. So you guys already have this commonality here. The next thing would be, and I won't touch too much more on that because I know you guys are well aware of what I'm talking about. A representative of substance. So these collaborative participants here, they must bring the right mix of experience because a lot of people have gone under the guise of it's not what you know, it's who you know. Sure, but I wouldn't want to get hired, I don't know, fictitiously, let's say, to do taxes for Bill Gates. Well, why? Because that wouldn't be a smart move on him because I don't know squat about taxes besides the individual doing my own. I'm not a CPO. So that's not a smart move for him. And that just makes me look good. And I don't bring anything to the table there. So after that year rolls around and I got to do this stuff for this company, I'm going to go, uh-oh, I no longer rely on my social capital to get me by here. So that only takes you so far. So for expertise, so again, the right mix of experience and expertise for the legitimacy and having the authority to make those decisions. So I entrust you with X because I know you can do it, and I'm entrusting you with that mission, so to speak. So you're looking for participants, the puzzle pieces, who possess at least one and ideally all three varieties of substance. So those would be authoritative, cognitive, and reputational. And sometimes, it's wise to create additional layers of participants beyond the primary or core group of, again, this hierarchy, because nothing works without a hierarchy. And so, when you start omitting people from the collaboration, it often guarantees that they'll become external critics and saboteurs. We see that all the time. This is sort of, I believe Mark will know what I'm talking about. I can't remember. A lot of religions have it. And so we see that we have the structure of the border, the the housing community, if you will, the community itself, and then the community gets destroyed, and then there's a piece of that square that's in disarray. Well, the hero goes out to find out what's going on, to battle the dragon, if you will. This is in all sorts of religions. I mean, it's been in history for 3,000 years, and it's about sort of the chaos that in which we must go and seek and find to mend that community. And then we repeat that cycle. We have to become a master of repeating that cycle, so we enter that chaos. But the problem is a lot of people stay within what's comfortable for them, and then that evil comes in and then messes all that up. So anyways, that's sort of a little purview into a representative of substance. And then back to the committed leaders. Well, what we were talking about before, we're entrusting these people that we're voting for based off of, what's tall, white, handsome, goes off the cuff well, all these things that are just nonsense. They're not good. We just think they're good. It goes back to a primitive law of attraction. Whatever you like, whether it be man to man, woman to woman, I don't care. I'm okay with that. This is America. You should be allowed to do what you want to do. Just don't. Sorry, phone call. Just don't impose your will on me and force me to do it, because that makes me not happy. And it makes me be mean and want to go underground and not be nice to you. So we have to entrust that these committed leaders are obviously an individual who possess the skill, creativity, dedication, tenacity to move the alliance, whatever the community, forward, even when it hits an inevitable rough patch. And then we value
and
those.
I would add empathy to that, and empathy and compassion
absolutely.
to that, because you have to have that, and that is not evident in the leaders we elect these days.
No, and I agree with that. Though you cannot go through the world on a compathical train. It just does not work.
No, it's just one of the boxes. It's one of the tools in the box, but it has to be there.
Yeah, it's an attribution or a trait that we would want to look for. True, absolutely. So, and then these alliances require committed leaders. Sorry, I lost my place here on my notes.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. And then those roles get organized within the hierarchy, so we can see them as diplomats, technicians, teachers, counselors, matchmakers, a referee in a game. That's why we have this hierarchy, because otherwise, if you've ever played 5-on-5 basketball in the backyard, and games can get pretty serious with people. People lose score. You get my point. And then so moving on from that, I would say there's got to be a clearly defined purpose. Back to me speaking on, well, we have a game. What's the game? 2s and 3s to 21, 3-on-3, 1-on-1, 5, what have you. That's why there is a clearly defined purpose. Otherwise, there would be chaos. And so it's the idea that drives people to stay on task rather than being sidetracked by these complexities. And so one of the problems I'd like to mention with you guys, you have all these complexities that you're taking on, but you get sidetracked by all of them. So you got to pick one, and then you got to keep going from there, whilst not losing sight of those other ones. And so it's what I learned in project management. It's called creep. So when you have a project that you're managing, there's different types of creep.
Project
and no,
creep.
I don't mean, yeah, exactly. And no, I don't mean the one down at the 7-Eleven. And I'm sure Marwan knows about project management and creep and what can come in and askew your timeline from that project, meeting its marks throughout its life and to close. And so anyways, being big enough to matter on the small scale, that it's small to you, you still will do it. And so as a committed leader, you develop that sixth sense for knowing when you're setting your goals, when things are too difficult to achieve, when they're outside of your scope and or too wide ranging. And you also need to grasp with what you've shrunk to that purpose and to the point of its achievement, so it will have a real impact. And then, there's other things that I wrote down on here that I've learned, through Marwan, through Cynthia Freeland, through Mo, formal character, something that I learned outside of Steps to Success in my college career. It's what's called the Northbound Train. That's intuitive confidence that an alliance will get to its destination. So it's buying from all these people. You're going in the right direction. You're going to have naysayers and things like that, but it's about talking to them about why they feel that way. And so this goes back into the hierarchy of the community. And again, like Mark said, you got to get people to the table. You guys got to start getting out there and having these conversations. You got to start. It's technically what we've seen. The townshire used to used to verbalize information to everybody that would be in the courtyard or what have you. And so now it's in the form of a town meeting. Everyone's invited, but not everybody shows up. It's people who show more concern in their HOA, who are more prominent in the community, no matter what they're doing, that show up. And so it's tough to get a lot of people to show up and voice their opinion on something, because usually the minority, I don't want to say doesn't get their way, but their voice is never heard. We've seen it with women's voting rights. We've even seen it with the Black community. I mean, we're not even that far removed from 1965. And we're still having these problems, and it's ridiculous. We shouldn't be having these problems because it's holding our society back. And it's in history, and a lot of people need to go and read the literature.
And we have to come together. We have to come together to overcome those problems by recognizing them, looking them square in the eye, and saying, this is ridiculous. We need to move on now, and addressing those issues. So, Nick, what do you think about starting off with like a weekly pancake breakfast?
I think that's a great idea. I don't really know what that means. I in my brain, that means like everyone comes somewhere to eat.
Well, okay. That's essentially it. Is Marwan's got a friend, Pastor Ellington, that has space, and we were thinking about inviting people there. It's in Bremerton. Later, when the year gets nicer, I was thinking that we could start rotating the parks, like Lions Park, Evergreen Park.
Absolutely.
And start moving into different areas, and using social media to invite people to come and listen to music and eat pancakes and eggs. And Marwan and I will be flipping, or maybe I'll be flipping
on a trampoline. Or no.
And Nick will show up as a guest chef.
That would be a one-time event if I'm on a trampoline. So
So anyways, just to cap all that off, the end result would be to define a common ground between everybody. So anyways, go ahead.
That's the whole model of the puzzle, is to bring people to the table and find common ground.
And so let me.
Flipping is now an image in my head. Let me just say that.
So let me summarize what I hear from Nick, because I think that's important. Is that we're having these conversations. You have three individuals that have different viewpoints, different values, some things that are common, some are divergent. But we can sit here and we can have a conversation of respect and find that common ground. One thing that I took from this conversation is, we do try to fix the world, right? I have a hero complex for sure. And I'm definitely aware of that. And sometimes you just need to kiss it, right? Keep it simple, stupid. That's really what I'm taking from what Nick is saying is, okay, so what is that one thing? And while we're talking about these pancake breakfast, still, what is that single point? You got them together. Now, what are we going to talk about? What is that common pain that Nick was talking about that we want to work on? We got you together because food will get people to come. Now, what is that common pain that we're going to work on and go forward with? And acknowledge. Hold on, and acknowledge the other pains that are there, and say, look, we're going to address them all, but this is the one that we want to tackle first, and then kind of have that proof of concept, right? We can tackle this, and through that, we can tackle these other things, and then go forward from there. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a suggestion and a challenge. First, the suggestion. I think next Wednesday. I think we just figured out what the topic is: a common pain.
Okay. And what exactly is that common pain? Because that's what we're going to be talking.
That's what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, and that's where you're going to find that out. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, this is for us to brainstorm. And Nick, I sincerely hope you're able to make it, because it would be great to continue this conversation, and talk about what that common pain might look like, so that
I
we
can
can
make
start
it.
figuring out what it is. Huh?
I said I can make it. Sorry, I had to look at my
Okay.
academic calendar.
All right. So that would be part of the conversation, about what that might look like, and we can start maybe brainstorming between us to figure out what that overall messaging could be for that. The challenge to this is to reach out to your friends and ask them to come to the conversation and join in, because in live chat you can actually talk and we can hear you and we can address the questions, and those are pieces of the puzzle we don't have. As we started off this whole conversation, and it is such a brilliant example of it. All three of us have divergent points of view, but when we start talking together, it seems to form into one whole way of looking at things, even though we have different points of view. So we need more of it.
So I have an idea, but I did want to, I'd summarize Nick's thoughts. So I wanted to make sure and check with Nick. Was that an accurate assessment of what you were talking about?
Yeah, I believe so. And I hope that I not sort of, but I hope that I answered your question. That was me sort of taking it on in a different angle. Um, because we know that all those other things that you were talking about regarding Cascadia, they're there and they will come. Mark does have great ideas. It is pretty large, because then we're talking about private sector stuff, just like with the water. We seen it in Compton not too long ago, because everyone knew about Flint, and I'll jump back to my point. Everyone knew about Flint, and they're like, oh, okay, Flint got fixed. Well, not really. And then there were other instances around the country happening in Flint, specifically in Compton. The reason is because the county sold the water stuff, the equipment, all the processing back to a private party, and the private party is doing a poor job. So there's some people get scared with that idea. I understand where you're coming from, and it does work when it's ran right. But yeah, that was an accurate assessment, I would
And
say.
more of it's going to happen because there are companies that are actually buying water rights from the cities to do just exactly that, and which means the city's going, well, it's not my problem. I handed it off to these people. And when you go right back to, and I'm going to totally blank on the name, but the Aaron Brockovich story about the place in the desert, that never got fixed. The water tables are still screwed up, and it's what, 20, 30 years and $320 million in fine, the largest fine ever levied at that point, and it's still screwed up.
Wow.
So
All
if
right.
we want to
So,
fix it, we have to come together. That's just the answer.
you know what? This is the fastest hour that I do on all the shows that I do. It's so fantastic. I appreciate the thought from both of you gentlemen. Now, one thing I'm going to put out there is this, because I'm not a procrastinator. So it's like, if we're going to do something, let's do it, right?
Okay.
So next week we're going to come together and we're going to talk about what is the common pain. I would like to issue a further challenge and say, you know what? I'm going to talk to Pastor Ellington, and a week is usually not enough time for people, but 2 weeks from today, the conduit will be at New Horizons Baptist Church, and we'll have the pancake breakfast or lunch brunch there in person.
Okay.
So we'll host the show from there. People can come in if they can. They still can tune in live, but let's start getting people together now and not wait.
Awesome. That sounds like a great idea.
All right, I'll
And
work on that end.
I will make gluten-free pancakes for people who can't eat wheat.
All right, I like it. So again, for Nick and Mark, I am Marwan Cameron. This is The Conduit. This show is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. We look forward to having your piece come to the puzzle and having your voice heard. We will see you next time. I will be back at 3 p.m. with Bremerton Housing Authority and Kitsap Community Resources. I hope you join us then.